Okay, so we're about to do a word study on the word upright. That's terrible handwriting. So what I usually do is, and it's very brief, it's not like super deep, but go to the Bible Hub app, and today we're gonna look at Psalms 11:2. The word upright is right here. So this is the interlinear Bible, and in the interlinear Bible, you see they have the Hebrew and they have the Greek. So what you can do is you can click this number above it, and it will take you to the Strong's Concordance. And the Strong Concordance will give you like the original Hebrew word. That's right here, original word. And so what I do from there is usually I go and I look up each individual letter to see what letter it is, and then I draw them out. So, what letter is that?
Yod.
Yod.
Shin.
Shin.
Resh.
Resh. Yod, Shin, Resh. So Yod. How do you spell the Shin? Is it Shin? You should do it.
Okay.
Oh, so it just wasn't good enough. I guess you're still erasing.
Thanks.
Yod, Shin, Resh. Okay, you could just keep doing that. So, I feel like Yod. What does Yod mean?
Yod is the arm work deed. It can mean to point in a certain direction, like to cast your arm to show someone the way for something. Like if you're asking for someone for directions, you go get that way down the road.
Right. And so that's why I usually draw the pictograph underneath the modern script, because that helps me to understand. And I use this thing that I have here, this picture from a Jeff Benner website that gives you the Hebrew definitions. So I can't, it's in downloads. Alright, so Yod, arm work deed. Shin is two front teeth, which means to separate, destroy,
And Resh
and Resh
is a man's head.
Man's head, meaning person first, beginning. I think Resh was like just a person's head. We draw it. Is it a duck? Okay. Alright, so just I like to look at the pictograph first before going anywhere else, just to see what like I would interpret of it if it was just me by myself and I saw it caved in a wall or something. So if I see an arm, the teeth, and the head from what I acknowledge, the arm for me I imagine to be the arm of Yah, and the teeth meaning separate or destroy, and the head meaning a person. Now I know that in Hebrew, each word can have a positive and a negative meaning, but already I'm seeing the arm of Yah that separates a person, just simply put. So when I think about the arm of Yah separating a person, I imagine it being separating it to himself, you know? And that's where these words come in. That's when I started to like come up with different sentences for what all three of these mean to me. So the first one, I'd say the arm of Yah separates a person. And I would just add onto himself, because if you reach out your hand and separate something from something else, you could be separating it just from something else, but I imagine if it's your arm, you're bringing it to yourself. Especially considering if we're looking at the word upright or righteous.
And in the context of what it says.
And in the context of what it says, right? So if you go back to the verse real quick, just to see the context, it was, for the wicked bend their bow and make ready their arrow to shoot in the darkness at the upright. So here the context is that the upright are being attacked by the wicked. So the upright would be a person, to me, just from my understanding, a person that's separated.
I also think of set apart.
Set apart. Okay. Set apart. Which makes sense because it's also being holy, is being set apart. And then it just goes into more conversation from there. What does it mean when Yah separates something onto himself, or even separates good from evil, and what defines being set apart? From my understanding, being set apart means being holy, and being holy means being like Yah, or within his righteousness. So then, for me, at least from my understanding, that would just come back to Torah. I think Torah is what creates a distinction between what is right and what is wrong from Yah's perspective.
It's a sword that divides.
Exactly. And so when we walk in Torah, that's really what separates us from the ways of the world. It separates, because in our minds, I feel like I've thought about this like really early on. I used to think about, well, what separates a person? What does it mean to be, like when I was Christian, I was like, what does it really mean to be a Christian? Like, I know I believe in God. I know that I go to church. But what really separates me from the world? And for a long time, it was just like, I guess, a moral disposition. Like, I don't kill anybody. I don't do the things that the world has told me is bad. I don't kill anybody. I try not to lie. Like these kind of basic moral justifications. But I would see people, or even myself, I would see that I'm not doing these horrendous evils, but that doesn't necessarily seem to make me the best person either, because I see that I would see that I still have faults, like in relationships, for instance. Like, I'd be out here not being a terrible person, but I'm out here cheating on my girlfriend, like, so it's like, it came to a point where I wouldn't ask myself then, but in retrospect, I'm asking, what would really separate a person, like, in their heart, not just in a way that people can look at you and say you're a decent human being, but how can I myself in my heart call myself set apart from the world?
Yeah.
And
that verse says that too, that the wicked shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. So it's not something that's like, even when I think about, since I've been reading the New Testament recently, when I think about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, how they saw themselves as upright in flesh, of like, oh, look at me, I'm doing all of these things and abiding by all of these statutes and commandments. However, it's not in your heart. It's more so something that you can, show off to other people. Almost like something that you put on when you wake up, and then when you're not in a setting where other people can see you, and where you're not being like lifted up by their words of like, exalting you, then it's not something that you carry in your heart, though.
So how do you think we actually carry Torah in our hearts? Because even with me saying Torah is that which sets apart a person unto Yah, they had Torah and they still weren't set apart.
Right.
So it seems like the distinction still goes like even deeper than just like the word Torah. Like, how do we actually live it out from your perspective?
I think the other thing I thought about when I was looking at this is that throwing, or the yod, where casting your arm in a certain direction. I think that you can when someone casts their arm in a certain direction to show you which way to go and to show you that this is the road or this is the path that you're supposed to take and not that one, you can see the path and you can say like, oh, I understand all of these things about the path without actually having walked through it. And I think that distinction is that, are you walking in obedience in Yah's path, or are you just saying, I know all of these things about it, and not actually, doing what it is that it requires in order to really experience it by actually doing it.
So that makes me think about obedience, first of all, but also makes me think of process, because we talked like we had talked last week about the process of teaching in Hebrew, where the Western understanding of teaching is just like instructing, whereas Hebrew in teaching is like a process. It involves instructing, but it's also meeting a person where they are and guiding them and being patient with them and nurturing them and teaching them and showing them and then living it out and being the example to them. And so when I think about that, I think about the process of being upright is a continual process. It's not like you get to a point where you're like, I'm upright now.
And I think something that made me think about is that like Yah doesn't just show you, like cast his arm and show you where you're supposed to go. I think we sometimes get into that where we're just like, that's where you're supposed to go. And just relating to what you were just saying about teaching, like he's gonna walk with us where it is that he's telling us to go. Because just like you've defined for the first one, separating onto himself. So it has to be something personal. Like it's not just, this is the path, take it on your own.
It's like he's walking with you like every day, every step. So it's that continual trust, that continual obedience, that continual relationship, that's found. The foundation is obedience, because ultimately to continue walking in the right way, you have to listen to him. But in the times when we don't listen to him, or we're afraid, or we're doubting, he also makes room for that as well, where he still involves that in teaching. He involves your falling away or your backsliding or your this and your that, and he makes those into lessons as well to continue. So it's on our part, the way to be upright is just that continual obedience, submission, repentance even, and continually seeking him in whichever way that comes up on a day-to-day and personal level. So upright seems to be, in a general sense, being separated unto Yah. And being separated unto Yah means walking in the way that he instructs, and doing that means continually engaging relationship and obedience and trust on a day-to-day and on a very personal level.
Something I just thought about that's like low-key unrelated is that in pottery, when you like separate the clay and you get to the wheel, they call it throwing.
Really?
Yes.
When you separate the clay.
So after you've separated the clay and you have the piece of clay that you're going to use to make whatever pot you're making, that process of like using the wheel and the clay and like molding it, that's called throwing.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty crazy, actually. Wow. The last thing that come to mind was, I think it was in Luke when Yashar was talking to the Pharisees too, that you had brought up earlier. And he was saying that, he was talking about how what the world sees as what the world sees as good is abominable to God. Because he was talking about the Pharisees, and he was saying, you paint yourself as upright, but God knows the heart, and so I think it's something I've been learning too about, like prioritizing the heart, being honest from the heart, and even more, it helps us to focus more on ourselves, because we as human beings can't see the heart. We can see reflections of the heart in actions, but even then we really can't discern what's going on in a person's heart from their actions. And so it's like knowing that that's what Yah looks at in us, and that's what we look for in others as well. And so we humble ourselves before the people rather than being quick to judge. But even in ourselves, for me, it's like looking more at the position of my heart than my actions. Like this morning, I was feeling bad for a second about not getting up and reading the Bible, because I said I was going to read it every day, which, I don't know, it's important to like keep your word at the same time. But also, if I had just read the Bible just because like, of obligation, then that would be the form of it. Like I would feel good just because I read the Bible, but in my heart, it's not really where I want to be. It's not really what I want to do. So I think instead, what the better decision was to like actually just be honest with you. Hey, I'm not feeling very encouraged about reading the Bible right now. Can you help me with this throughout the day? And then just go, like, get up, and I went for a walk, and then I came back, and now I'm here reading the Bible, but actually being involved in it. Like, he answered my prayer rather than because I was honest with him, or I imagine because I was honest with him, rather than me sitting here forcing myself to read a chapter just to finish a chapter, like, I'm finished finally, you know, and then now I don't have to look at it again for the rest of the day until tomorrow. So I think going from that position of the heart rather than going from the form of what it would look like will also help us in that continual relationship. So yeah, that's how we do brief. Well, I do brief first stories. I don't know if yours is any different, but yeah, I hope it was beneficial.